Good morning, I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily video update for May 3rd, 2024. For those of you who don't know this, today is World Press Freedom Day. Well, it's important to recognize this because we're seeing an attack on freedom of the press, a censorship industrial complex trying to keep the truth from getting to you. Now, at the same time, we're seeing the attacks on the truth and attacks on journalists. So with the free speech in the United States under assault, it's certainly worthwhile to take a minute or two to reflect on the importance of honest journalism and free speech as constitutionally protected in the United States. Now, I'll come back to that in a moment, but let me start with just a couple of headlines. NATO General Secretary Jens Stoltenberg once again demonstrated his absolute arrogant blindness to reality. As Russian troops are advancing against depleted Ukrainian forces, Stoltenberg is criticizing NATO members of failing to provide the promised military aid. Well, the problem is that they can't produce it. The economies are so weakened that the only way to produce it will be to go into a total military production process at the expense of everything else in the economy. But that's what they've committed themselves to, but it takes a while to gear up for that. Meanwhile, he said it's important then to make commitments to long-term agreements to continue the proxy war, as the British have done. Sunak signed a 10-year agreement with the Ukrainian government, which may not be around that long. Now, what Stoltenberg and others are refusing to admit, which most people now recognize, is that the war is lost. It cannot be won. And if you continue to send in arms and money and encourage resistance under the fake line that Putin is planning on conquering Europe if he's not stopped in Ukraine, all you're doing is promoting an escalation which will lead to more dead Ukrainians. Why not diplomacy? Why not negotiation? Well, that's the crime being committed by Stoltenberg, Biden, Sunak, Schultz, Baerbock, all of the political leaders who are insisting that the war continue to be waged to weaken Russia. The issue is not Ukraine, though. The issue is the BRICS. While Ukraine is being battered and while Ukraine's future is being sold off to the likes of Larry Fink of BlackRock, what's the real issue here? The Western financial system's collapsing, and a new system is emerging around the BRICS. The argument that the West can steal the Russian deposits to give money to Ukraine is causing a reaction now, especially in the global South, but even among bankers who are starting to ask questions about whether or not they would become liable for charges if they steal money. Well, Dodd-Frank gives the banks the right to steal money. So, we're looking at a degenerating situation across the board. Now, part of that is the situation we're seeing on the campuses in the United States, where there are continuing demonstrations against Israeli genocide. And the students are clear on this. They're saying they're not anti-Semitic, they're anti-genocide. But Bibi Netanyahu is insisting that the campus demonstrations are being run by anti-Semites, and it reminds him of the Nazi period, what's happening on campuses in the United States. Well, that's Bibi's warped view, and that warped view serves his purposes of keeping the war going. He's vowed to go into Rafah even if there's a ceasefire. So he's taking away the incentive of Hamas to have a ceasefire by saying whether you sign or not, we're going in. Now, meanwhile, Biden and Trump are echoing Netanyahu on the student demonstrations, accusing the demonstrators of anti-Semitism and violence. But if you actually have seen the videos, if you've seen the local coverage, not the national coverage, which is always distorted, but the local coverage, shows that most of these demonstrations are nonviolent. Most of the demonstrators are not anti-Semitic, and that in fact most of the violence is coming from police and from outside non-student activists, as in UCLA, where a gang of thugs waving Israeli flags charged the encampment at UCLA and did a lot of damage, a lot of violence, while the police stood by watching. And one of the people watching this, a reporter for the UCLA Bruin newspaper, said that it appeared as though the intent of the counter-protest was to provoke something that would cause the police to come in. Well, that's what ultimately happened, and over 200 students were arrested there. So what we're seeing is, with Biden and Trump joining the voices to Speaker Johnson, to Pelosi and others, saying that we have to fight anti-Semitism, what they're saying is we have to silence the opposition. That's the reality. It's an attack on free speech. The House of Representatives just passed a bill saying that opposing Israel is now a sign of anti-Semitism, and it has to be monitored and stopped. Well, this brings me to this question of World Press Freedom Day and the issue of the demonstrations. And several of you wrote to me and said, aren't you being naive? These were pro-Hamas demonstrations, which is what Trump and Republicans are saying. You're being used. Soros, the Democrats, the left are using you to support terrorists. Well, I got news for you. That's not at all true. There may be scattered people in the crowds who are pro-Hamas, but on the whole, the message coming out is stop the killing, provide humanitarian relief, and take the money going from the endowments of colleges that are going into the war machine and divest it. Divestiture is not a sign of anti-Semitism. It's saying that money that's going to colleges from the corporate cartels of the military-industrial financial complex should not be, that money should not be coming from the universities. The universities should stop accepting that money and being part of the military-industrial complex. That's what these demonstrations are about. Justice and humanitarian relief for the Palestinians. Now, if you think that's a pro-Hamas view, then you clearly are missing the point of what's going on in the world today. And the students will tell you, we're not anti-Semitic, we're anti-genocide. Now, for those who don't like that, well, I got news for you. The International Court of Justice ruled that what Israel is doing is a plausible case of genocide. Now, the problem in the U.S. is the bipartisan support for the military-industrial financial complex. And that's why this vote 2 weekends ago was so important, where Speaker Johnson swung the MAGA crowd into support of the money for Ukraine and for Israel. And they used Israel as the lead to make this switch. Now, here's the important point. The military-industrial financial complex didn't go away. It's still supporting these wars. These are neocon permanent wars that serve no interest to the American people, but are there for the sake of protecting the unipolar order, which is primarily a construct of the multinational corporate cartels. So all of a sudden, people who were opposed to the deep state are cheering on the deep state. Look at the FISA bill. Johnson broke the tie on the vote that would have outlawed warrantless wiretaps. He made sure that the warrantless wiretaps are going to continue. That's what Speaker Johnson did. Was he there doing that on behalf of Trump? Well, Trump said, kill the bill. But what he did was he went ahead and passed it. So, people have to start getting real and understanding what's going on with these things. The fact is the majority of members in both parties in Congress support permanent war. Johnson embraced Schumer. The Republicans embraced Biden's war. Even though they criticized Biden, they're embracing his war. Now, this brings me to the point of the attack on free speech. If opposing Israel is now by law defining you as an anti-Semite, what's the point of that? It's to chill your free speech, to convince you you'd better keep quiet. You'd better not express your opinion, because they're going to make it against the law to criticize the policy of the government of Israel. And so those people who are opposing the demonstrators ought to look down the road and see where it's going next. That the anti-Semitism monitors they're talking about on campuses will soon be in place in businesses, on the streets, everywhere. That's the police state in the making. That's what Snowden was warning about after 9/11. That's what many of the people who were opposing these policies until recently understood was the threat against constitutional protected free speech and free press. So the evidence is since 9/11, and even before that, of course, we've been lied to repeatedly by the intelligence community, by the administrations, by the media about what's going on. And if you challenge that now, you're considered an extremist, a neo-Nazi, an anti-Semite. Well, that's how you silence debate. Our founding fathers thought it was more important that people face uncomfortable truths than have those truths suppressed for the sake of keeping people comfortable. If you disagree with someone, have a discussion. If you think the policy's wrong, try and understand where the other person's coming from. That's what real democracy is about, debate. And in a republic, that freedom for debate is the essential policy commitment to ensure that the tyrants don't take control. What should make you mad is the fact that you're being lied to. Dialogue and communication, and in these war situations, negotiation. That's how civilized society should react. And admit that maybe you're wrong about something. Or if you're so convinced that the other person is wrong, show them that they're wrong. That's debate, that's discussion, not censorship and suppression of truth. And so people who say, I'm naive, thinking these demonstrators are pro-Hamas, well, show me the evidence for that. And in the meantime, look at what you're doing by not talking to them. You're accepting the idea that the government can take us to war without an honest debate, that the government can take your tax dollars and shovel them into the pockets of Zelensky and his cronies without even an opportunity to counter that, that the United States will continue to arm Israel as it's violating international law, including the 1947 Genocide Convention. And if you raised your voice against that, you're the criminal. Is that where you want this country to go? So thanks for joining me this week. Share this video, and I'll be back again next week with your daily update.